So you're pretty sure project-based learning is where you want to take your school. But what do you do now? You don't want it to fizzle out in a year or two. You're not exactly sure that all teachers are going to buy in. Where do you start? You start with the movers and the shakers? Do you get the laggards on board? That's why we created the PBL Movement Conference. We have a whole strand dedicated to you and your leadership team coming to figure out the next 3 years of implementation. You don't want it to be a top-down mandate because you know that that doesn't work. Your high flyers are going to do great stuff anyway. Your late majority and laggards probably aren't going to do it at all, or you're going to have to make them do it. You want a grassroots movement where teachers are saying, hey, this is what we need. This is the direction we can go in. Look at the examples that are happening in my classroom. You want to come see? You want to join? That's why it's called PBL Movement, not PBL Dragging, Kicking, and Screaming. Right? That'd be an awful name for a conference, actually. So PBL Movement Conference, when this episode first comes out, you're still going to have a chance to get some tickets. It's close, though, because it's the end of June. We do it in the summer. We're going to do it twice, actually. We'll do it again in October. But in June, if you want tickets, you need to hurry. And if they say they don't have room, just say, hey, I heard on the podcast, Ryan said I could get in. I'll help you get in. Because you should. You need a 3-year plan. That's what we figured out over the years, over the last decade, is that if you just jump in and try a few things, it's going to fizzle out. And you're going to say PBL doesn't work. And that's not true. It does work. You just need a good plan. A plan to get people engaged and on board instead of just having to do things. And when you have to do it and you're doing it out of compliance, you do get bad PBL that way. But there's definitely a way to get great PBL. We see it all over the country. We want you to join us. Join us at the PBL Movement Conference. Just go to pblmovement.com for more details. Welcome to the PBL Simplified Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer, brought to you by Magnify Learning, where we believe that education is the vehicle to save the world, which sounds like a big statement, but I think it is. I know Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars and he'll save the general consciousness of humankind, but that's not really our goal here. Our goal is generational change, though. And if you think technology is going to do it, I think it falls short because not everybody buys into technology. If you can change the education experience, though, for one kid, then it can change it for their family when they grow up and have kids, and theirs and theirs and theirs. There's generational effect. What does this look like? Well, I had this student named Skylar. And if you go grab the book PBL Simplified, you can hear his full story. Or if you've ever heard me talk or give a speaking engagement, I typically lead with Skylar's story because he grew up in generational poverty. There were drugs in his home. He didn't bring them there. He was the kid that could do it. Like he had the capability to do well in school but chose not to. And it's really because his family didn't just not value education and schools, but it was adversarial. It was like, I do not want to go to school. School is bad. Well, we changed that for Skylar. School's good. Like it led him to the life that he has now, where he's a freelance photographer. He's an Instagram influencer. He can travel the country, and he has sponsors like Coleman Camping Gear or Monster Energy Drink, like people you've heard of. And he's some kid from the southwest side of Indianapolis. He'll tell you that. And when he looks at education now, he's going to look at it differently. When he settles down, has a family, has kids, they are going to see school as a way to opportunity, to brand new opportunities. Assuming there's project-based learning in there, he's going to be pretty geeky about that. He doesn't want traditional education for his kids. He wants to be project-based learning where it's purposeful, not passive. But when his kids do that and they have a great experience, then their kids are going to have a great experience, and you start to get this generational effect, which is why we talk about having 51% of schools doing PBL by 2051, because that's how you start to change the world. You do it generationally, and education, I think, is one of the only tools that does that. We have that influence. You have that influence. The things that you say to kids, that you say to teachers, like they listen, and it changes lives. Like you might have that story. I've heard that story over and over again. How cool is that? Like we're in that business, and that's why this is serious stuff. Not that we want to get overly serious. Like we can have a good time while we do it, but we want to dive in deep. We want to learn. We want to get better. Hopefully that's why you're here. If you are, you're in the right spot. Today we are talking about why you should ooch into project-based learning. And don't tune out if you are a seasoned PBL veteran leader, because you should listen to this too. So this is the first of a 4-part series on bringing different elements of PBL into your school or to your staff. And it's come from a lot of different need to knows, and I think it's going to be pretty solid. I'm super excited about it. Today we also have a need to know. Should I have a bank of community partners for my teachers to select from, or should they go find their own? The leadership leap today is going to be Predictable Success by Les McKeown. It's a business book. As we do PBL Simplified, whether it's the podcast or the YouTube series, We're looking at things from education, sports, business, wherever great leadership is happening. I want to bring that to you so you can bring it to your school so you can do amazing things. So let's jump in. We're going to start with this need to know, and it's a good one. And it means that you've been doing PBL for a while or you get it. The question is, should I have a bank of community partners for my teachers to select from? This question actually comes from somebody's getting ready to start a school. So they know they want project-based learning. They want their kids to be engaged. They want their teachers to be engaged. They know community partners are a huge part of that. And I agree with them. You've got to have community partners. You have to have real-world problems being solved. If you're doing scenarios and you don't need community partners, you're doing the wrong PBL. You're not going to get the engagement for your learners. You're not going to get the buy-in. You're not going to get the employability skills. There's a huge difference between going out and cleaning up that park and going out and cleaning that park and bar graphing the recyclables versus the trash, and then actually doing a presentation to city council to actually have something change within that park where you can see that the park is now different because you did something. That's different than cleaning up a park and it gets dirty the next week. Right? There's a huge difference between a scenario project where you're pretending to be someone who owns a business and you're going to pretend to see what kind of profits you get, and you're going to pretend that you're going to have some problems, versus your class starting a business that's going to support a local nonprofit and you actually have to go sell something. Whatever the scenario is that's in your head, scenario versus actual work is a huge difference. So I love that it's in this need to know of like community partners are important. They are a cornerstone to the work that we do in project-based learning. If you're just investigating, you've got to have community partners. You have to have the real world piece in here. So how would you answer this question? Should you have a bank of community partners for your teachers to select from? I am going to take the stance that you should be really careful about that. You want your teachers to see the value of community partners to the point that they will go out and find their own, that they will speak to community partners, that they know the authenticity that they bring to their classroom, and they're willing to get over the fact that it's hard to talk to people and ask. So especially when you start, like when we start in a 3-day training, we're going to ask your teachers to say, hey, what community partner would fit these standards that you're looking to address and engage? Let's look at your entry event, your end products. Who would be great for this? You know, we ask those questions like, who does this work in the real world? Who can we help? And who cares? And you ask those 3 questions and you'll find somebody right away. And your teachers will go and find a community partner. Community partners want to help. They will say yes. They'll find somebody right away. Now, once you start going down this path and your teachers understand that, I think it makes sense to start tracking the community partners that are coming in. And we always say it's because, you know, you don't want to ask the same person 8 times. And that's true. You don't want to overdo it with a community partner, but it's all about relationships. And if you've got a good relationship with a community partner, they'll let you know if it's too much. They'll reach out. But as you start to build a bank, you start to build some respect within the community that, you know, your school does neat things in the community. You can have these community partner breakfasts where they come in and you can showcase the great work that you're doing. And then you can start to say, hey, who wants to jump in? And this person that sells insurance says, yes, I'd love to jump in. What do I do? And then you can start to say, well, we've got some presentations coming up. Would you like to sit on a presentation board? Yeah, I'd love to. Right. So as you start to get into that, then yes, you need some formality. But I would be really careful when you start. Like in the systems where they say, hey, I've got this bank, and teachers just go to the bank and say, hey, I need somebody from the zoo. And then you line up somebody from the zoo. Like when they haven't done that initial work, sometimes it gets a little wonky. So I think it's important for teachers to walk through that step on their own with help. I mean, like with scaffolding, you just throw them out in the middle of Indianapolis and say, go find somebody. But I also would wonder about just bringing them to them. So I'm not sure about that piece. So community partners, it's all about relationships. So make sure you're taking care of that relationship in whichever way you go with this need to know. Let's jump into the leadership leap. As you are listening to the PBL Simplified podcast throughout the month, you're going to find the first and the third Wednesdays are leadership episodes. They're going to be solos. It's me talking through a need to know from the field, a leadership leap, which is meant to leap your leadership by going through a book and give you a quick snapshot so that you can learn from it. You can also decide if you want to purchase it and like dive into it. Like I like to have 3 books that I read over and over throughout the year because they're ones that motivate me, move me forward. And I still have other books in between that I use to, maybe master a quick skill like prospecting or calling people or those types of things. And then I also have to read books to bring them to you. So that's a separate idea, I guess. But I think you should have 3 books that are like cornerstone for you that you quote often. People know that you quote it often. They know it's part of your ethos. So I'm just trying to help you find those. That's the first and the third Wednesday. On the second Wednesday, we have a PBL showcase. So we bring in typically a teacher to talk about a PBL unit that they've implemented in the classroom. It's a great one to invite your teachers into. It's a great one to share so that you can hear what others are doing with PBL. The fourth and fifth Wednesday, if there is a fifth Wednesday, those are PBL guest episodes. So that's where I'm bringing in somebody from education, business, or sports to come and just talk leadership with you. So you can get another voice in your head as you're listening to the podcast, and it can move your leadership forward. So our leadership leap for today is Predictable Success by Les McEwen. Predictable Success. This is a business book, solidly a business book, but I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from it in education. Predictable success is the idea that when businesses start, it's fun, it's exciting, it's a little crazy, but you want to be predictable over time. You want to have predictable success. So what does it look like in the school realm? He's got this really great arc that he takes businesses through. So there's the early struggle where you're just getting started and you're just trying to make ends meet. You're trying to make payroll. In an education setting, like if you just started a school, you know what that's like. Like you've got to get schedules together. You're just trying to make sure that teachers are in the right classroom and you're teaching kids, right? And you're trying to move things, but it can be a fun thing, which is the next stage. Is once you figure that out and you've made it, now you're in the fun stage. The fun stage is where you're making an impact. You're passionately moving things forward. And as a building principal, you're probably doing all the things, right? You're doing all the things. You're filling in for subs. You are a community partner that comes in. You are doing evaluations. You're coaching. You're talking to community partners. You're doing all the things. And it's fun. It's exciting. You're busy, but you're doing like really great work. And then you hit this section called white water. White water is where you've grown and now it's fun, but there's a little too much. Like the wheels start to get a little wobbly on the cart, right? So you start missing some meetings, or you tell one teacher one thing, you tell another teacher another thing, because it seemed like good ideas at the time, and you've got all these great ideas, but you don't have like a North Star that you're pointing people towards. You're just trying to do great things all the time, and that's fun. So then you kind of go from white water to fun. Like things get wobbly, so you pull it back a little bit and say, hey, remember what we're about? We're about helping kids, and you get back to it, and it's fun. Well, when you come up to predictable success, you kind of get through the white water where things get wobbly, and well, as the name would suggest, things get predictable. So let me give you a couple of ideas from the book here. Is when you get into predictable success, you successfully navigated through white water. So now you have systems and you have processes. Like people know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Here's the 5 characteristics of predictable success. You've got decision making. You have the ability to readily make and consistently implement a decision. So everybody knows how to do that. Like they know that decisions, how they're made. Maybe it's you, maybe it's your leadership team. It's probably not all you if you've gotten a predictable success. You've got a collaborative decision-making process, but people know what it is. It's not just willy-nilly. Ryan says do this, Ryan said do that, and it's going all over the place. If you've made it through white water, things are becoming more predictable. You have systems and processes. Number 2, there's goal setting. You have the ability to readily consistently achieve those goals. So the goal setting piece is interesting. So it might be, we're going to implement this new curriculum, or we're going to implement, an advocacy time at the beginning of the day. But that's the goal. Everybody knows that's the stated goal. They know the steps that they need to take to fulfill that goal. That's way different than fun. Like in the fun stage, it's like, hey, I went to this conference and we visited the school, which is some good due diligence, and advocacy courses seem awesome. Let's do them. And then you jump in and everybody's doing something different. It's really difficult to say what's high quality, what's not, because there's no rules. It's good. Like good things are happening. It's fun, but there's not a whole lot of system to that. So when you get into predictable success, when we say we're going to implement advocacy courses, there's maybe a book study. There's a process. There's a structure. It's not overly structured. That's the next phase. But there is some structure and people know what that looks like. That's the next one. Is alignment is number 3. There are structures, processes, and people, and they're in harmony. And people know where they fit in the process and the structure. If a teacher says, hey, this isn't working, they know what the process is to bring that up. If they have a great idea, they know how to bring that up. And they know you're not just going to run with it, but it's going to go through a decision-making process. There's accountability. And it's interesting how Les puts this in Predictable Success in his book. It says employees become self-accountable in addition to being externally accountable. So there's little room for time wasters and mediocrity. Staff are driven by passion for the mission to do a good job. Because things are predictable, there's a mission statement, a vision statement, and people know what it is. It's said often. They know that if a decision comes up, they know kind of the rubric that they need to go through really quickly to make a good decision. So we're, as employees, as your staff, they're actually internally accountable. You're not holding everybody accountable. I mean, you are at a certain level, but you don't want to be micromanaging every single classroom. You want the majority of your staff to know the direction they're supposed to be going and going in that direction, which also leads into number 5, which is ownership. Employees take personal responsibility for their actions and outcomes. Staff are driven by passion for the mission to do a good job, which means they have to know what the mission is, right? So that's predictable success, which means that you've been through early struggle, which you might be if you're a new principal, and you've been through the fun stage where it's all about you and your personality. By the way, a lot of people burn out in that stage. So then you try to get to whitewater. You try to add some structures, some processes so that you don't burn out. And in whitewater, it's just like it sounds. Like if you're rafting or canoeing in whitewater, like it's kind of messy. It's up, it's down. You're not real sure how things are going to go. So it takes intentionality to get to predictable success, which is why I think this book is so important. And let me get to the other stages here for a second, because if you get through predictable success, you can actually over-process your system as well. And this is for, like on the DISC profile, like those SCs are all about processes, which I love to have those people in my life because that's not my natural bent. But you can also over-process things. And when you do that, you start to get into what they call the treadmill stage. So now people are not innovating. They're not being creative. They're just following systems and processes. They're being compliant. And compliant is the enemy, in my opinion, right? Like you were trying to get away from kids that are compliant. You're kind of trying to get away from staff that are compliant. Did it, boss. I did a PBL. I did it. Check it off the list. I don't want a compliant PBL. I want a passionate, exciting PBL. So you can get to the treadmill, and then he's got probably some more business pieces, I think, that eventually can lead to a business demise, but it could to your career as well. Like that's where people start to get burnt out. Like, and you're like, I did all the systems and processes and it's still not working. And then you start to move on. And we're looking at predictable success. So we're trying to get things that will work long-term. And what a lot of that means is that you've got systems and processes that people understand. A lot of it's the mission and vision. Like people could recite on their own, not because they memorized it, because you say it so often. People know what gets you excited. And then one last thing I'm going to leave us with is he's got this diagram, and in predictable success, it's that four quadrants. In the top right is you're going to decide slow because you have systems and processes, but you implement fast because everybody's on the same page. Right? If you're in whitewater, you're going to decide fast because the leader decides everything, but you implement slow because people don't really know where to go. When it was fun, you decide fast and implement fast because everybody's doing their own thing, but it's fun and it's passionate. You want to get in that predictable success place where you decide slow. You don't just switch halfway through the year. It's like, we've got this process and PLCs are tough right now, but we're going to figure it out because we all decided that it was a good idea. We went to Neosho, Missouri schools and we saw like, man, PLCs make a big difference here. Like we want that. Well, guess what? That didn't happen in 1 year, right? That happened over years of refining, implementing, thinking, collaborating, adjusting. So we think PLCs are important. We're going to take time to make them better. So you're going to decide slow, implement fast. So I hope you make it to predictable success because that's where passionate things are happening, but on purpose. And actually our next podcast episode, I'm going to have Dr. Jennifer Cox and Josh Rhodes on, and we're talking about succession planning. Like how do you make sure that your great work happening in your building continues after you move on? So it's a great conversation, but you have to have some predictable success of systems and processes that are in place and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Hope this leadership leap helped your leadership leap just a little bit higher. All right, our main episode is the first in a 4-part series. I love the 4-part series because we can build on each other. right, so this first, I'm going to explain what it's going to look like. And what we're talking about here is, why should you ooch? And ooch is an idea from the Heath Brothers, their book Decisive. Love the Heath Brothers stuff. They're really deep thinkers, and they put a lot of research into their work. If you've read Switch or Upstream, like some of their books are awesome. Decisive is a good one, like how you make decisions on purpose. And ooch is you make a small step to see if it's going to be a good idea to make a bigger step. And I encourage people to do this with project-based learning. There's a lot, because sometimes people get frozen. I love the idea of jumping in. Like if you see it, you should jump in 100%. But some people kind of freeze and say, well, what if this doesn't work out? Which is why we have design days and PBL movement conference, so you can plan out the 3 years and see what it looks like. But you can ooch in between. Like if people aren't quite ready for full project-based learning, there are some things that you can do. And again, if you're an established PBL leader and you're listening to this, thank you. But second of all, you have people in your building that are not 100% in. So how do you get them to ooch so they're a little bit closer to where you want them to be? And this whole 4-part series is taking us through our model schools rubric. We have model schools across the country that you can go and see. If you want to see awesome PBL, just reach out and I'm happy to connect you. But we don't just say, hey, good job, right? Like that's, actually, we probably did at the very beginning because we were in the fun stage and we were just doing great work. But now as we move into predictable success, or unpredictable success really, we have a system and a process for that to say, here's what makes a model school. Here's where you're at, brand new school, an emerging PBL school, and we take you through this journey on the PBL models rubric. So I took it right out of there to say, what are our model schools doing that other schools can learn from? And broke it up into 4 parts. And these are all small steps. I'm going to give you a bunch of small steps that you can go into over the next couple of weeks. So let's jump in. So here's my premise, is that we have trained over 10,000 teachers, over the last decade or so. And that doesn't count like conferences and that kind of thing, like deeply trained and coached a lot of teachers. And we see a lot of different personalities, and they tend to match the innovation curve. You've got those innovators that are ready to jump in. You've got early adopters that say, hey, give me a book and I'll do it, boss. You've got early majority. They're going to wait to make sure it fits in your building. Late majority that are going to need some additional love, and some laggards that don't want to do it either way. And the way we've formed Magnify Learning in our trainings is I talk about it as curriculum versus skills-based. We're a skills-building organization. If you bring a new curriculum in, it doesn't really do well on the innovation curve because your innovators are going to do whatever they want anyway, and it's going to be great. Your early adopters are probably going to follow the curriculum and make some adjustments. Your early majority will follow it. Your late majority are going to wait because they still like the old curriculum, and your laggards aren't going to do anything. But your skills-based training, everybody moves up. Whether you're an innovator or a laggard, we can move everybody's skills up a little bit. And that's what we're talking about in this series. So you have this guy that we affectionately call William, and during the PBL training, 3 days, he's playing chess on his computer. And every time we come up and say, hey, William, how we doing? How's your PBL unit coming along? Great. It's really good. You check in a little bit later. It's good. Like, you're going to love it. And he'll talk through a couple things about what it might be. But he's probably not doing anything. He's playing chess still. Now, as we push him, the PBL unit he ends up creating is better than what he would have done had he not been there. But you have that guy. Like, how do you move him forward? You have the sports coaches that are in the back waiting this one out. They're going to say, I'm going to see if this one just goes by. And sports coaches, I know that you're doing some amazing things out there because I know Jordan Manley. And Jordan Manley's doing some amazing things in health and PE, and he's developing a lot of momentum around PBL and PE. You probably have a Karis who's just scared to do anything. Right? I don't want to do anything new. It freaks me out. And we get this. And, they have 100 need to knows of like, well, what about Billy? How's he going to react? What about if somebody doesn't like my entry event? And how do you get them to move just a little bit farther to show that it's okay? And you've got Claudia, who's been doing it for years, right? She's been doing this PBL. Yeah, I've been doing this for a really long time, so I'm good. Well, it might be a little bit different, right? So how do you get all these different personalities? Because you also have your innovators and your early adopters that are just going to run with it. So how do you look at this whole spectrum of the innovation curve, and how do you get people to move? And I don't think, again, depends on your leadership style in your building, but I don't think it's making someone do a PBL unit. Like, hey, you have to do this. Because then if they have to do it, they're doing it out of compliance, and it might not be good. And now you're defining PBL as this poor PBL project. So what if you could get them to ooch just a little bit farther? That's what we're going to talk about in this series. We're going to give you a bunch of different tips to have people move forward. And then you can have everybody, and we're working on this, we're working on a badging system where you can see where everybody's at. Where if they bring in a community partner, even to a traditional unit, we can badge that. And then they give kids voice and choice, even in a traditional unit, we can badge that and be like, hey, great job. Like, you're getting closer to PBL. Like, look at these PBL-like things that you're doing. And we're not talking about watered down PBL. Like, even in this whole series of PBL Simplified, this whole kind of new brand that we have, it's not PBL watered down, it's simplified, because we now have the tools, we have the feedback, we have the supports that you don't have to make all this stuff up. We have predictable success around project-based learning. So it's simplified, not watered down. We're still holding to a very high standard. But you need some on-ramps for people if they're not ready to jump all in. So how do you do this as a school? Well, as a school, you're going to do it through your vision, right? Like, where are you leading people towards? I talk about this in a couple different episodes. Like, that's one of your main jobs as the leader, is to present a vision. And if you're a teacher leader, like presenting a vision within your class, like when people walk into Mr. Stoyer's class, this is what you should expect. And if you, like, we all know kids do that, right? Like, they know that 6th period is different than 8th period, it's just different than 3rd period. Like, every different teacher has a different set of expectations. And I'm not talking about the page that people hand out on day 1. I'm talking about, like, are we going to do amazing things in here? Or am I just going to regurgitate information and move on? Like, you set the tone. It goes for teachers in the classroom. It goes for principals at their school. What is your vision? That sets the bar. Like, we're going to go here, but then you have to let Claudia and Karis and William all figure out how they're going to get there, because they might not see it right away. So how do you help them ooch? If you've got a clear vision, people can start to see where they fit into that vision, both where they're at, where you want them to go, and some steps on how to get there. And that can be an evaluation conversation, but there should be opportunities in between for them to move up. And we're gonna talk through that idea. For individuals, I think you look at the innovation curve. Simon Sinek talks about it with the iPhone. When you look at the new iPhone coming out, there are people that camp out overnight. There are people that are going to wait until some of the bugs are fixed out or out. They're going to wait. Some people just wait till their phone dies. Some people are never going to get an iPhone. Like, they're going to have a flip phone forever, and that's fine. But you have to know that each set of people is different. And if you look at your school building like that, you could probably put your people on the innovation curve. And if you Google innovation curve and hit images, you'll see it. And you've got 5 different areas typically, and you could literally put your staff in this innovation curve. And when you do that, you're not boxing them in and saying good or bad. You're boxing them in and saying, how do I support these people differently than these other people? Because they just need different supports. So you've got to figure out how you support people to move them towards your vision. Because it's a great place to start when you say, my vision is to bring project-based learning to our school, to our community. Look at this. Here's the amazing things that we're going to do. Here's some stories. And then you come back to the teacher that maybe isn't that close to project-based learning, like they're very traditional. And you say, you know what? When you do this, and you give the kids choice in how they show their mastery, you have that choice board, that's PBL-like, not light, not L-I-T-E, like. This is like PBL, like you're on the journey. Like, you might be closer than you thought. Let's try to bring in a community partner. That might be our next step. What do you think that would look like? Oh, I'm a little nervous about that. I agree, but I can help you think through that process. And you create an area where they can get just a little bit closer to project-based learning. And then as they're moving closer and closer, they can get to a full PBL unit. And it's all benefiting. It's all moving in the same direction of your vision, because your vision's out there. And now people generally know where we're at. But we need some scaffolding, just like we do for kids, to help our adults get there too. So that's the first part of this series on making small steps into PBL. You got these 2 different parts. You've got the idea that if you're a leader and you're just moving into PBL, these are some things that you can start before you start formally. And again, we work through these on design days and the PBL movement if you want some help with that. And if you're an established PBL principal, you've got some teachers that are not fully operating at the highest level. So how do you help them? You can't just say do PBL better, right? You need some intentional tactics. That's what we're going to talk about in the next 3 leadership episodes. We're going to talk about culture, Give you a whole bunch of ideas on culture, how to help people build culture in small steps. Real world problem solving will be episode 133. How do we get people to move away from scenarios and towards real world problem solving? And then in episode 135, we're going to talk about voice and choice. And I'll separate those out in that episode. I think it'll still fit in one episode, but we'd say voice and choice because they rhyme, but they're two separate things. We're gonna parse those out and give you some very tangible tactics that you can bring to your teachers right away. So that's what the next couple leadership episodes will look like. Our next episode, though, and the next Wednesday is going to be a PBL showcase. And it's an awesome PBL showcase because we're going to have Dr. Cox, we're going to have Mr. Rhodes on, and they're at Deeper Learning Schools in Shelbyville, Kentucky. When I say Deeper Learning Schools, it's a large public district, and they just know how to do deeper learning. They're having really great conversations. They've been having them for a long time. And Jennifer used to be the principal at the middle school, and then she moved to central office, and Josh moved into her position, and it went really, really well. And I don't know if they read Predictable Success, but they basically walked right through it because they know predictable success. They talk about clear vision. They talk about goals. They talk about all the things that leaders need to be talking about, and they do a great job of it. It's going to be an episode that you're going to want to listen to again and again and share. So make sure you tune in next Wednesday. It is going to be awesome. And as you do that, as you continue to listen and implement some things, you're going to engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classroom. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of the PBL Simplified Podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And I want to share it with others. Would you take 2 minutes to leave a review? Go to your podcast player, just scroll down, leave a review for the PBL Simplified Podcast. And when you do that, it lets others know that this is a podcast worth listening to. Thank you.